Welcome back to everybody who's watching. Hopefully you are doing well, you're staying healthy, etc., etc. What we're going to be doing right now is obviously going over what we had talked about during today's lecture. So today's lecture was all about using JSON. So JSON is a very important way that we transfer information across the web. Today, in today's video and in today's examples, we're just going to be demonstrating how we can download JSON files, how we can use JSON and this idea of JSON in order to be able to get data from across the web using these APIs. That's what they're called. On Monday, we will start to talk about how we can actually send out JSON data. And by sending out JSON data, we'll be able to create a complete web application on both the front end, the JavaScript side, and the back end, the Python side. So right now, it's giving me lots of warnings. What we're going to be doing first is I just have a couple of examples for today to demonstrate how we can download these web pages and JSON files. Frankly, the way that we download JSON is by doing a web connection. So that's the first part of it. So my main.py is not very interesting. I found just a couple of different websites that we can use for this. Is it giving me all sorts of warnings? The way that you can find these websites, there's actually a link in the slides. I posted this during lecture. Lots of different places have it available. And part of what you can do is, if as you read through them, you can just find different things. So the first example I want to use, the one I actually used during the videos, is for the International Space Station. So the ISS, there is a nice nice website. It's opennotify.org using iss-now.json. And what this does is this actually is a site that will make it available. You can use it at any time to find out where that International Space Station is flying over the entire Earth. So the URL is this. It's also called a URI more properly. And in order to do any of this, you'll note that we need two import statements. We need to have this import urllib.request. This is a library, and actually both of these libraries are built into Python. This urllib.request, this is a library that we can use to have Python automatically go out over the web and grab web pages, web data, whatever we're looking for. The second library we're going to use is JSON. We're going to need to import JSON for that. And that's going to allow us to automatically convert and handle all of the JSON data. So for this to work, you can see the first thing we need to do is open up a connection to that URL. So the way that we do that is we call this function urllib.request.urlopen. And then we have to pass it a string, type str, with the URL we want. Now, this can be done the way I'm doing it in this example right here is I'm using a variable to do that, and that is perfectly legal. It could also just be a string literal in there. It could be an expression. It just needs to evaluate to a string, right? It's an argument. Now, what this does is this will go out and make that connection, but it only makes a connection. It does not read in the files. It does not do any of that sort of work. In order to do everything else, what we need to do, in order to read things in, what we need to do is take that response. This is going to return actually, we can show this off. We'll get to the other stuff soon, but you can just see what it actually returns. Is not a particularly helpful thing. What that URL open returns is this HTTP response object. So it's this piece of data that we can use that's just going to tell us, hey, we've made this HTTP connection. If we try to get a URL that doesn't exist, so note I just got rid of the N, page there, then it actually gives us an error for a 404. It gives us that 404 error. So we do need to make sure the page exists, but that's usually not too much of a problem. Then what we can do is read and decode that response. So there's two parts of this, right? There's calling response.read, and note this is a function. We need those parentheses. And what that is going to do is that is going to read in that data, whatever's on that file, or in this case, that JSON. Now, the problem is that there are actually different ways to encode text over the web, lots of different ones, and sometimes you don't get the way that you need that's easiest to work with. So whenever we call this .read, we typically also call .decode, and that makes sure that the results that we get back are a standard string, the sort of thing that we always do. So if I run this, what we're going to see is I get this data right here. And actually, I'm going to print out a second thing. So I'm going to use a function. There's a built-in function in Python called type, and that just returns the type of some value. So here, when I give it content string, it'll tell us what type content string is, what we're actually going to read in. And what you can see is this data that we get back is a str. Now, obviously, if you look at this, this str looks a lot like a dictionary. And that's because that is how JSON works. JSON is a way that we can encode all sorts of different things. We can encode strings, anything inside of quotes, so like here, message or success. That is a string, or is encoding a string. It's not a string right now. Anything using these brackets, braces, the curly braces, that is a dictionary. And we could also have arrays. I'll show you examples of that later. And anything in brackets, these square things, that would be encoding an array. If it's not in any of those, so like this right here, then it's either encoding a Boolean, if the value is true or the value is false, or the last case is it's encoding a number. So this timestamp here will be a number. The latitude, because it's inside of quotes, would be interpreted eventually as a string. But note right now, all we have is a string. We can't use it as an object. In order to get data that we want, in order to get something that is useful, what we need to do is call this function JSON.loads. And what JSON.loads is going to do is convert that JSON blob, that's what we call it, a JSON blob. We're going to convert that blob of JSON, that string, into actual working Python data. So just to show you how this works, actually, comment out that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that content string, use JSON.loads to turn it into working Python data, and then print out the data that we have and its type, just so we can see it. And so now, of course, it's going to take a little bit, but there it goes. And you can see that the type now is dict. This is a dictionary that we're working with. So before we had a string, and it was an entire string. Now what we're seeing is exactly what you'd expect, a proper dictionary. So this dictionary is going to have keys, message, ISS position, and timestamp. The value for message is the string success. The value for ISS position is itself a dictionary with keys latitude and longitude. And the value for timestamp is the number 158,000, whatever that, really big number. So if we want, we can then do anything we want with this. This is now workable, usable data in Python. So we can, for instance, print all this out. And so this will get the content, right? That's this dictionary right here. It then gets the key ISS, uses the key ISS position. So that will look up and evaluate to this value. And so then I can say the key longitude, which will evaluate to this right here. Now, right now, I'm saying, let's typecast that as a str because I wanted to add it to a string. But note that we don't have to do that because since that is in quotes, and it was in quotes originally, it will already be a string. So I can just do it this way. And this will just print out now. Comment out that other stuff. We don't care about it. What the longitude and latitude are. And if you look, this number keeps changing because, of course, the ISS is traveling at some ridiculously fast speed that I don't actually know because I'm a computer scientist and not a physicist, astronomer. I don't know. Whoever's in charge of ISS, rocket scientist. So we can work with that, right? These are strings. If we wanted to find out that timestamp, what it's doing is it's evaluating how many, it's actually evaluating the number of seconds. So since what's called the epoch, the start of time for this system. So if I divide that number by 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, I can actually find out how many days that has been. And note, I'm now using this timestamp as a number because I can, and I can print out those results too. So if I do that, you can see it's been 18,353 days since the epoch, since the start of this timestamp in seconds. Long time. And you can see the ISS continues to move. So how do you know what sort of data you're going to get back from in this JSON blob, what sort of data you're going to be sent back is a really good question. The answer is you just have to read the documentation. Any place that provides this JSON blob will also say, document, here's the data that we're going to respond with, just so that way programmers can use it. This is sometimes called an API or part of an API. And, again, part of being a programmer is just having to read through this stuff. Any questions about this sort of basic work with the URL lib and using JSON? Okay, so pretty much in some ways that's all that you need to do to use this URL lib in JSON. It's actually a really simple process, right? You do URL lib.request.URL open. So what is the difference between a URL and a URI? That's a good question. Technically, what you were working with should be called a URI, a uniform resource indicator, as opposed to a URL, which is just a web page, a uniform. But this was a thing that was set up at one point in time that never, ever, ever caught on. And if you have people who are incredibly show-offy, as apparently I am right now, they'll say, no, a URI is correct. It's a URL. Just use the term URL and don't worry about it. Effectively, there's no difference. No one ever pays attention between them. But that is a good question. Thought I'd gotten rid of all of them. So the other thing I have is there are lots of different pages lots of different sites that you can look at that give you all sorts of data about this. So I just have a couple of different examples just to show you what you can do with this. So one is this website blockchain.com that has an API that shows you how you can, and what it does is that JSON, you have to if you go to this website, you can read all about this API. And it has all sorts of different ways that you can write a query and make a query to get information. So for instance, suppose we wanted to figure out how many Bitcoins we can buy for $500. So if we go to this website, I can actually load that up. You can see that it has all sorts of different information here. So for instance, if we have this, I'm using its example, HTTPS blockchain.info to BTC, currency equals USD. That's saying so from US dollars, 500. So if I run this, right, what I'll have to do is take that URL and note that this is not just a regular URL. This is a URL with a query string where we have that question mark, and then we have one key value pair. Currency is assigned USD. Value is assigned 500. So we open up that URL. We call read decode to get that JSON blob. Then we call JSON.loads to get it in as usable Python data. And you can see what we get back is, if I updated my main to actually call Bitcoin, what we get back is that right now for $500, you can buy 0.080470002 Bitcoin. You know, if we wanted to look at, you can see there's all sorts of different money here. Suppose that we wanted to see the same thing in euros. So how much 500 euros would purchase? We could just do EUR. Again, I'm just going through the documentation it provides here. And you can see 500 euros buys a little bit more. Another thing we can do, just more information it has available, is it does have a way that we can look at not just a single number, but look at its value in all sorts of different currencies. So that uses this URL right here. And again, note that we open it up, URL lib.request.url open, pass in the URL, take that response, call read decode. That gets us the JSON blob. Then we have to call JSON.loads to turn that data, that JSON blob, that string, into usable data in Python. In this case, again, just looking at the documentation, it's going to give us a big dictionary. The keys are going to be the various currencies that it has defined, and the values would be what the price is, the last price, the buying price, the selling price, the symbol of that currency. So if I wanted to print this out, right, you can see we've got this huge object, all the different currencies. And before that, by going through the keys, I can just see all the different currencies it defines. US dollars and Australian dollars and Brazilian real, I think, and whatever else. And so for people who are really interested in doing work with Bitcoin or some of those cryptocurrencies, this is actually a very useful JSON string. This is you could use this information and have an up-to-date monitor, a continuously updating monitor of the value of a Bitcoin. If you actually care about real money, not that I have an opinion on this one. Another thing, and for some of you who are there, is there's this nice website, exchange rates API.io. This is actually provided by the European Central Bank specifically to enable people to be able to do all sorts of work with foreign currencies. So again, the way that you have to understand this, there's lots of different information it provides. You have to read through the documentation. There's no way around that if you wanted to use this. But so for instance, suppose that we were interested in the latest exchange rates for the euro. So what we could do is, again, there happens to be a, get rid of some of these. Just comment some of this out to make it more clear, right? So what we can do is get that latest exchange rate. It's from the European Central Bank. By default, they go to euros. And again, we call URL lib.request.urlopen. You might notice a pattern here. To open up that URL, response.read.decode to get the JSON blob, json.loads to get usable Python data, and then print it out. And then at some point, this will respond. At some point, this is going to respond, and I probably have scrolled up. I have. Okay, so if I run this again, where I can actually see it, you can see it's got the latest exchange rates, the up-to-the-minute exchange rates for euros versus all sorts of different currencies. Other things you can do, you can actually look at, there's ways, and I'm not going to go through all these examples unless someone really has a desire, but you could see this. You could actually go to the URL for my REPL and actually see these and just copy this. You can look up the base price for a specific currency like the US dollar, the China's, I can't actually pronounce that word, I apologize. But they actually do a lot more. So for instance, suppose that we wanted to look at how the, let's look at more recent data. Let's look at the last week of data for, let's say, here's the last week of data for the Great British Pound. So how the currency in Britain compares to the Canadian dollar and the Thai baht. I don't know why I even know that. So again, the process is identical. We're going to be using that same URL lib.request.urlopen. And then we call response is. If you look, you can see on the 25th, the pound was at 1.69 Canadian dollars and 38 point something or other Thai baht. On the, it's actually in a random order here, which is one of the interesting things. So for those of you who don't know, dictionaries are not by definition ordered. They can show up in any order. So we have on the 30th, by the end of the week, it was at 1.76 Canadian dollars, 75, 76. So it has been going up, I guess. I'm not a finance person. But again, this is something very, very simple, right? This is only, I mean, literally only, what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code. And now all of a sudden, I've got all the data I need to be able to write something which can track, and using a program like Plotly, which we'll get into how to do this if I want to do this on the front end, using something like Plotly. Talk about how to do this in JavaScript on Monday. We could start to write something which will graph exchange rate data. And we can write all sorts of programs to create a sort of exchange rate trading program. So again, there are lots of different sites that can do this. Let me switch to another one of these. So in Reddit, just to point out that this is not limited strictly to JSON. So Reddit, for instance, allows us to do a search for any page. And the way that you do a search, right? Normally we'd go through the web page, but if you use that inspector, you can actually find out where that information gets sent. And a Reddit search, what it does is it goes to www.reddit.com/search, and then it has as a query string whatever you searched for. So suppose we wanted to search for Matthew Hertz, and then I have sort is top just to order it from the top to the bottom. Now this won't be a JSON blob that gets sent back. That's not how it's defined. It will actually be a web page, an HTML page. But now to open that up, we can work this just like before. What we do is we again call url_lib.request.url_open. We have to then take that response, read and decode it. And what we're going to get back, and this is going to be huge, is a huge amount of text you can see as it continues to scroll. This is literally the huge web page. This is everything on that web page that would be downloaded if we do that search. So, right, I could do the same thing in my browser. You guys don't need to see my actual Reddit page. My actual Reddit account. So, right, if I do this exact same thing and open it up in my browser, you can see all of these search results. This is literally the text that we see here is just the HTML that encodes this, including, and I had actually forgotten about this, the fact that there is a subreddit apparently dedicated to me with 14 members. There are a lot of people who need to get lives. So now I'm really kind of curious where my name has come up in some of these things. What if I told you South Dakota doesn't exist? That's got to be an interesting thing to have a search for my name. But, this is a way that we could start to, get these web pages. And part of the idea I wanted to show with this is just that as we're doing this, when you are working in JavaScript in the client, you're getting all this text. It's really just text. It's just a string. We like to think of them as files. They often are files. But really what we're doing is we're sending strings back and forth over the web, just a way of going about it. So any questions about this so far? Okay, so don't see any. So one last example is just to sort of combine ideas of JSON and web pages is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is actually pretty out front. You can actually using Wikipedia, they actually make a API available. Again, we can look at this page. There's, again, no easy way of, just finding this. You have to read through the documentation that is part of this request. I should add, many sites would require you to make an account. Part of what I've done is I'm choosing sites that don't. Note that they still have terms of service and all that sort of thing. But if you read through the documentation, you can see you can get like a summary of a Wikipedia page on a topic. So a little while ago in Piazza, someone asked about Heinrich Hertz. So suppose that we wanted to find out the summary of the information Wikipedia has on Heinrich Hertz. And this is a huge long string again, so it's hard to read. So what you can see is that here what I'm getting is I requested the page summary of Heinrich Hertz. If we use extract, it gives it to us in plain text. So again, I have to do url_lib.request.url_open. Then I have to call, response.read.decode. It's going to come down as a JSON blob. This is this API. If you look, it is using JSON to transfer all of this data. That's the way that happens to work. So I have to call json.loads to convert it to something usable in Python. And then if I do that, if I get the extract, we can see that all sorts of information about Heinrich Hertz, who coincidentally, Heinrich Hertz was in fact the name of my great grandfather, who did live in Germany at the same time, but not the same Heinrich Hertz. My great grandfather was we owned a. I was gonna say we were merchants. My great grandfather was a merchant. He owned a little general store. Nothing particularly exciting or valuable. So that's one way you can get a summary of a topic. You can actually look up specific information. So, for instance, if we wanted to find out who was born on this day, we can do that by, it's got a feed on this day, birthdays, I said 0401. Just to point out, URI here is a variable name. It means, it's a meaningful variable name, hopefully, but we can name this anything we wanted. I can't come up with a good name off the top of my head. I'll just come up with a stupid name, literally. Right? It's just the name of a variable. Since it's not in quotes or anything else, it's just a variable. So again, we open it up, we decode it, convert that JSON blob, and then if we want to look at everybody whose birthday is today, we wait a little bit because apparently Wikipedia is being slow to respond. You can see that we're going to get the full information of everybody whose birthday is today. So happy birthday, Emperor Go-Saga, the 88th Emperor of Japan. And if you look, part of what we're doing is, part of what's happening right here, make this bigger, is this actually combines both HTML information and JSON information. So there's lots of different metadata about this, lots of different URLs to other pages, to links. There's information about thumbnails and everything else, but you can see that some of it is also text. So there's this French lawyer and politician whose birthday is today. There's Joseph de Maistre, whose birthday is today. Lots of people born, lots of French people apparently. George Dance the Younger. Probably not listed here, but Neil Lowentritt, who is my best friend growing up, it's his birthday today. So you can see lots of different information. Again, even more is available once you understand a couple of simple basic calls in Python, and you just start reading through the APIs, right? You can generate citations. You can create reading lists, apparently, in Wikipedia. You can get mobile-friendly content. You can get page content. Anything you sort of want just by using this. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how we use these JSON blobs. And I guess one last thing just to demonstrate. Right, is there is no need that, now, typically 99% of the time, JSON is used for doing stuff over the web. But of course, if we want, so what I'm doing right here is I'm using /a in order to, because I need the double quote, and I started with a double quote. A better way of doing this is if I start with a single quote, I can actually use double quotes since I can't end it. So I'm going to make a key A and the value 45, the number 45, a key B that will be mapped to true. Right, now this is a string, right? It's inside of single quotes. That is what Python will consider that. But I can call JSON.loads, even though I just wrote this did not come over the web. I can call JSON.loads on it. And if I do that, and let it run, you can see that it's going to convert this from the JSON blob, from this string, into actual Python data, just the same way that it did everything over the web. So what it ends up doing is it's creating a dictionary. The dictionary has two keys, the string A, the string B. Note that A's key is the number 45. It's not in quotes. B's key, you notice I used a lowercase t. That is how JSON defines that Boolean value true. But of course in Python, that uses a capital T. So B's value would be the Boolean value true. So everything that we've talked about can also be done inside your code. But this is a way that we can start to work with information, work with connections all across the web. So anybody have any questions at this point? Anything you want to know about, anything that you want me to review on how we can use JSON in Python? This is going to become important moving forward next week, afterward, and in your project for parts, I guess part 4 in particular. Okay, since there don't seem to be any questions, why don't we end this live Q&A? Thank you all very much. Hopefully have a good day. Make sure you stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.